Now, my guest this evening is someone who describes herself as an adrenaline junkie. If there's a roller coaster, you will find her on it if she can get on it. Seriously, as I've been talking to her over these weeks in preparation for this, reckon that life has put her on a pretty difficult roller coaster ride. And we're going to hear her story this evening. So would you put your hands together and welcome Rachael Adebemi-Soye. Rachael. Well, Rachael, thanks so much for being with us. I have been worried all day that I would actually pronounce your name correctly. So how did I do? Did I get even close?
Close-ish, but it's a good job I didn't give you my middle names.
Go on, tell us your whole name.
Rachael Temidayo Oluwatoyin Ayodeji Adegbemisoye. Thank you.
There we are. When we were preparing to name our children, we thought, how can we make sure they don't have to spell that? You start your life spelling that out. And anyway, thanks for helping me with your son. Where does your name come from?
So I'm from a Nigerian background, Yoruba in particular. I did start with a shorter surname as my maiden name. It was only 3 letters. And then I met Sam, realized his surname was ever so slightly longer. But praise God for Chip and Pin, because then I had to not sign anymore. So that was great. Great.
So tell us about Sam. When did you meet him?
So I met Sam, we'd grown up in the same church together. We went to an African church in Elephant and Castle for basically all our lives. And we grew up together. And then I went off to uni. He stayed in London. I went to uni in Lancaster. And then his father passed away in 2003. And it was during the time I was doing my exams, so I couldn't get down. Said to my mum to please pass on my regards and my sentiments. And then when I came back from uni, so Sam says the story is that he'd liked me all the time and then decided, carpe diem, seize the day and asked me out. And that was in 2003.
And you're sending him that message wasn't anything to do with you liking him?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah, I did the same with my wife as well. Yeah. So he asked you out and the rest is history.
The rest is basically history. Yep, we were together for 7 years. We got married in 2010. He first said, I love you, and I said, well, that's nice, good for you. Waited a bit longer, and then, in April 2010, we got married.
Fantastic. So, married in 2010, you did a bit of traveling as well.
Yeah, we did actually. So we went to, everywhere really, you name it. Cancun, Florida, like I said, adrenaline junkie. So we did go to Disney World. Perfect. Went round and round and round on so many rides. And we were very kind of chalk and cheese. I'm more extrovert, more talkative. He's a little bit quieter, little bit more reticent about maybe going upside down and giving your life over to a chunk of metal. But I'm a bit more of a rebel.
You did the right thing as well. If you've never been to Disney and you like that sort of thing, you should go before you have children. They get in the way. It's great fun without children, isn't it?
Absolutely.
My wife and I did the same. We enjoyed taking the children as well, but nowhere near as much fun as it was when we did it on our own. Absolutely fantastic. There's you and Sam, you're married, you've done some traveling, and then you've got a daughter.
Yep. So Phoebe, she was born in 2016. Slightly dramatic birth in that Sam ended up delivering her. Not at all planned whatsoever. I think I'd held on too long. I heard so many horror stories of always kind of, you go to the hospital too soon and then they send you back. So, I clearly stayed at home. Said it was, I think it's now time. He called the taxi, took the stuff downstairs, and then I was about to put shoes on and thought, I don't think I'm going to make it down the stairs. So I'm going to start pushing. He came up the stairs and was like, what are you doing? And I said, I think you need to get some towels and some hot water or something, because I know what I'm doing. what are you doing? Basically. And 28th of March, 2016, Phoebe was born.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So look, I can imagine you. Here you are. You're married. You've done some traveling. You've got a beautiful little girl, and then things. You're now on your roller coaster. Things are heading downwards.
Yeah. So 6 months or so after Phoebe was born, Sam just had a routine checkup. I don't think it was anything in particular. I think it just a routine checkup. And as he was sat there with the doctors, they kind of looked at him strange, as if, are you okay? And he was like, I'm fine. And his heartbeat was going way too fast, to the point where they thought he was having a heart attack, even though he was talking to them absolutely fine.
And this was not unusual. I mean, he wasn't feeling anything particular. So this is just how he was living.
This was just how he was living. I don't know whether your body goes into a default and is so used to a new normal, in a sense, that you don't really pay attention to it. But he was absolutely fine, but the doctors were shocked, to say the least. And then from there, it was a series of going to different appointments, both in London, in Cambridge. It was just so abnormal that his heartbeat was racing so much, yet he was feeling nothing. And unfortunately, what then started to happen, I'll get slightly medical, so please forgive me if I get anything wrong, but there's an aldosterone was being pumped too much in his heart, which was therefore causing all his organs to just work overtime. And everything kind of went from fully functioning to very, very low function in a matter of, over a course of a couple of years, really, but very speedily. In particular, his kidneys, to the point where they then required dialysis, and he needed to be signed up for a kidney transplant. So
you've gone from normal life to a routine check to suddenly, within, it seems like no time at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Life is completely turned upside down. And this had other ramifications as well,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sam was a branch manager at Carphone Warehouse, and he had been for years. And he very soon couldn't hold down a full-time job. It went to part-time, but then ultimately it went to the fact that he couldn't work anymore. So he stayed home and I went out to work. Even when he was at home, though, he didn't always have the energy. Phoebe at this stage was now going to nursery. So some days he didn't have energy to even look after her on the days she wasn't at nursery. So we had to, thankfully we did have help, but we did have to have the help even when he was at home. I mean, the upshot of that was that he became quite a very good cook, so I didn't have to cook anything.
You joke about it, but it must have been agony, having such a big life change. And for him, I'm guessing he's had all these years where he's the breadwinner, he can't be that. The implications of that for him. You now having sort of the pressure of having to go out to work, and I mean it's just enormous. And at this stage you've been involved in church. You said you've got a faith. What was going on with you as far as sort of your faith was concerned?
Yeah, I think when we got married in 2010, we had about 10 other weddings of our peers also getting married around that time. And you kind of stand up there and you say, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. And you say all these things and you truly do mean them, but you definitely don't think in sickness and in health is going to be as soon as it came. You definitely look to your peers and maybe question, God, what's the hand that we've been dealt versus the fact that nobody else was dealt this hand. I definitely did start to think, what did we do or didn't do or should have done or shouldn't have done? And when I... So
you're actually blaming yourself.
Yeah.
Where does that come from, do you think?
I think, as I told you, I went to an African-based church, but I think also culturally and sometimes wrong theology, wrong Christian thinking says, well, if something's happened to you, then what did you do? Is it a sin that you've done, or is there some kind of ancestral reason that this has now been brought upon you. And I think sometimes you're already on that slippery slope anyway. And if you've got these kind of views from before kind of drummed into you, then you do start to think, well, actually, if it's not happening to this couple or that couple, and maybe what did we do?
Yeah, as you say that, I think that, I've experienced that when I've sort of sat with other people suffering, regardless of that kind of background. Often it is the kind of, why is this happening to me? Behind that is that very question, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, if you don't see it happening to others, not that you wish it on anybody, but you certainly think to yourself at the end of the night, when you're just kind of in your own company, where have we gone wrong? What have we done wrong?
So are you at this point sort of tempted to give up on your faith, or what?
I think sometimes it would be easy to. You definitely put God in the dock for a hot minute, and you definitely want to question him and think, what do you think you're doing, Lord? But I do think what Sam and I did do is that we have been raised praying, so we did pray. I think when your back's up against the wall and things are just happening in such a roller coaster way in front of you, we did, take it to the Lord in prayer. We did pray, and I did just cry out, because what else can I do?
Yeah, you do. Sometimes you get to that point, don't you, where everything else is stripped away, and there's kind of nothing else left. You had a brilliant expression where you talked about God was in pen on the paper, and everything else is in pencil. And,
that's right. Yeah. And I think that is the one thing, as I continue to go through this journey, that actually that doesn't change. He doesn't change. Everything else, and I mean everything else, changed. But God didn't. And I think it's so easy to then think he does, but he really doesn't. He really doesn't, and he really hasn't.
So here you are, life has taken a pretty, you've had a pretty big kick in the shins, frankly, if I can put it that way. And then 2020, lockdown comes, COVID. We remember that time. It was a weird time. But for you, it got weirder.
Yeah. So I remember lockdown, actually, because it was literally the week before Phoebe's 4th birthday, and we had to scramble around trying to, make something up for her birthday. And then during that time was when Sam had to get fitted with I think it was a fistula, in order to prepare him for having dialysis. We had deliveries of, I can't think, 50 to 60 to 70 boxes, because he was due to have dialysis at home. So we were all prepared for that, because...
And until that point, he'd been going to the hospital for dialysis. So this was a new phase.
Yeah, so he hadn't started his dialysis yet, but in 2020, he was due to start it. But in the meantime, it was all very much a kind of containment and managing what he had, with the idea that, he'd be on dialysis for however long, and then hopefully we'd get a match for a kidney transplant. I know I was tested, my brother was tested, to see who would be a match. So that's where we were going. We kind of were all set, ready for, okay, we've got a spare room, dialysis sorted, he knows where he stands, we know what we're doing. Okay, right, we've got a new normal, but we can manage with this new normal.
His disease that you've explained to me, it's kind of obviously really serious, but the doctors have told you it's not really, in one sense, life-threatening. I mean, obviously, he needs kidney transplant. That's serious. But it doesn't appear to be life-threatening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we were heading for this new normal, but it was a manageable new normal in the sense that, we could see a different type of life, but still very much see a life where we could manage this and maintain it, and we'd have the medication coming through, and he knew what he needed to do. I knew how to assist him. So we thought we were on kind of a new, steady, even keel. And then in August, he celebrated his 39th birthday. And a month after that, well, actually like 2 weeks after that, he had a turn, and he suffered a bleed to the brain. So it had crushed his brainstem, and he had to go immediately to hospital.
Did you just, I mean, did he collapse? How did you find him?
I had heard, so he and I's sleeping patterns were completely off. So he was often up while I was asleep and things like that. So it wasn't strange that he'd be in the living room, maybe gaming or watching TV or whatever he was doing. But I heard a noise that just sounded like a collapse or something louder. Went to check it and just found him kind of stooped over on the floor. Immediately called the ambulance and they came very speedily. They took him away. Now, because this was now in the heat of COVID, I couldn't go with him, but I also had Phoebe with me. So I thought, no worries, you go. We held hands, he went, and I said, I'll see you soon. And then it was the following morning, they called and said they had to do an emergency operation just to relieve the pressure on his head, otherwise he could have died straight away. But they had put him in an induced coma. When that was the Friday, when we then went to see him on the Monday, they basically said the damage was irreversible, and therefore they pretty much prepared us on that Monday to say it wasn't going to look good. So at this stage, I had his mum and his sisters with me, and we were all kind of just reeling from this news. Obviously, many of the people that I surround myself with in that time were very much praying to God for a miracle, that things would change. And I don't know how, but I got to a point where I said, we often can pray, the Lord's will be done. But when we pray, the Lord's will be done, what we actually mean is, this is my will, Lord. Can you rubber stamp that? Thank you very much. And I think sometimes we have to prepare ourselves that the Lord's will be done may look quite different to what we would like. And so I was obviously hoping against hope, but the next 2 weeks were really about kind of end-of-life care. And when people may say, but where was God? What I actually think was actually the grace of God was that he did have those 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks it allowed people to come and see him. It allowed Phoebe to come and see him, because the last time she saw him was when he had put her to bed. And I didn't want that to be the last time that she did see Daddy. I wanted her to know that Daddy was in the best place. He was in a hospital. But also just so she doesn't have this idea that 1 minute he's there and the next minute he's gone and then she's fearful forever. So, we had 2 weeks with him. The hospital were very good. It was during COVID, so it was a very, very weird time in that you couldn't actually see people. You couldn't send a horde of people into a hospital room. But they did very kindly allow 2 by 2 by 2 to keep coming in over the next 2 weeks. And then on the 11th of September, 2020.
Well, that's a significant date.
Yeah,
Oof.
exactly.
11th
of September, 2020, in the early hours of the morning, we got a call to say that he'd passed. And so myself and Phoebe went down to see him, because again, I wanted Phoebe to be a part of this process. I think it's very easy, maybe, when you have little ones, to not include them in anything. And I think that's more scary. We prayed with her, we share the Bible with her often, and she's aware that death happens, but obviously we didn't think it was going to happen so close to home. So she did come with me, and we then had to start something very different.
Think about a funeral.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you say that you didn't expect death to come, because of course this wasn't really related to his illness.
No.
This was another thing that was just so out of the blue.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even as if, it's always hard, but it wasn't even as if you kind of been preparing yourself for this to come. It was just from nowhere.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then a COVID funeral.
Yeah, which I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. He passed in September. I had a cousin who passed in April, and she was of the 15 people funeral. So we were the 30 people funeral. And then graciously, we were able to do a kind of Thanksgiving service, which under the rules at the time meant that we could host that at St. Helens and have it as a wider family, more people being able to come because it was under a service heading. So that was on the Sunday, the immediate Sunday afterwards, which was wonderful because church family had been amazing all the way through, but from afar. Nothing was normal. So nobody could come to the house, nobody could hug me. There were people I was saying to Sam that Sam had died 9 months after he died. There were people who had to be told on WhatsApp, I'm not a social media person, but I had to kind of go into his social media and write a message to hope that it would get to people. It was interesting.
We forget, don't we? 4 years on, 4 or 5 years on from 2020 when everything started, and I forget just sort of the implications of all of that. But and how how people just didn't know what was going on in our lives,
Absolutely.
And so you've got such a momentous thing, and breaking that news to people in normal circumstances is hard enough. Now you're breaking it 9 months later, and people are going, "Oh, I never knew."
Yeah.
Because why would they? Because they wouldn't have expected to see Sam anyway, because we were all in lockdown. And how bizarre.
Yeah, and I think at the time, because everybody was going through something in a weird way, it felt like, we're all kind of going through something, until you realize people are then going back to their normal, but I don't go back to my normal.
Life is never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
I was speaking to somebody some years back who had a terrible time, different to yours, but terrible time through COVID. And they now sort of remember the 2020 time, and people talk about COVID and they say, 2020, terrible year. Oh, yeah, and then there was COVID as well. And kind of, that's how it was for you, really. Yeah,
absolutely.
Tell us, if you will, I'm sorry, I don't know how to put this without it sounding really crass, but, to say that it was a dreadful time is like the understatement of the evening. But just tell us some of the things that you were coping with then, beyond that.
Yeah, I probably wasn't coping. I don't know. I don't know what I was doing.
I'm not surprised.
I was existing. I was surviving. And there's a numbness. If anybody's been through any form of bereavement, there's definitely a numbness to it. You are kind of living outside of yourself. You're kind of seeing things happening, but you're not really sure that it's you still doing them. Obviously, we prepared for a life as a 2-parent household. So Sam had passed 3 days after Phoebe had started primary school. So he never actually got to take her to primary school. He picked the primary school, we picked it together, but he'd never got to take her to primary school. And so all of a sudden, I'm now a single parent working out, how are we doing drop-offs, pickups, all these activities? How are we doing any of that? But now I'm doing it by myself. Even down to my identity. Who exactly am I? Am I still a Mrs., but I don't have a husband? I think it took me 2 years to fill out the renewal of my passport because I felt like a fraud saying Mrs., but at the same time, I wasn't a Miss. I'm still keeping the surname. Emotionally,
and if I may just, so the passport issues, but actually relating to people on that as well. So you say you're Mrs. and they're wondering, you've got to explain the story. Do you? I mean, how does that work? I mean, it's something I've never really thought about before.
No, and I think people don't sometimes, well, rightly so, but I don't think they get that. I don't think they work out that I don't quite know where I fit. Am I with the married because I was married, but I'm not married because I don't have a husband with me? Am I single, but I'm not single because I also have a child, so I'm not quite with the singles? So you're just kind of floating in this kind of loose area of not really knowing where you fit in, where you which group to join, where to identify yourself in terms of who are you really. And when a lot of your everyday is wrapped up with a partnership or in a partnership, even simple things like I didn't know how to shop for one adult and one child. I didn't know how to cook for one adult and one child. I didn't know how to, I have a moment where I went to, I think it was Marks and Spencer's, and I'm so used to getting this particular meal deal, and I realized I couldn't get the meal deal anymore because one was very much a Sam meal deal and one was very much mine. And I just kind of broke down in the aisle, and I think somebody just didn't know what exactly to do with me because I was such a blubbering mess. And I just thought, even that, overnight, changed. Everything changed.
You're crying over a tikka masala and nobody understands why.
Exactly. Everybody thinks maybe it's the last one or something.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want that one. Bizarre. So you've got these sort of practical issues. You plan to sort out all the schooling and all those sorts of things. That's gone. How do I do that? You've got identity issues. I mean, it's just apart from the absolute agony of no longer having Sam around. I mean, and the loneliness and the pain. Yeah.
And it's really tangible. But again, for 2 years out of the almost 5 years that he's passed, it was done in COVID times. It was done when actually I couldn't really do grief properly. I didn't know how to do grief at all. And I certainly didn't know how to do it when everything that is so fundamental to grieving, as opposed to sharing it with people being able to come into your home and, express their grief, look after Phoebe. All those normal norms have gone. Everything has been stripped away, literally to the point where it's just me and. And for me, it had to be me and God, because as I said before, he was the only constant. He was the one who said, cry out to me, and boy, did I. He's the one who said, I will never leave you, nor forsake you. He is the one who said, leave your fatherless children to me. I'll keep them alive and let your widows trust in me. And I had to do all of that, every single one. It was almost like learning how to walk again, in the sense of learning to trust in a way where sometimes we say we trust the Lord, but we've really got all our creature comforts still around us. But actually, when everything is taken away, and when everything is stripped back to its bare minimum, it really does mean start again. Start again. I had nobody in the house, so the only voice I heard was the Lord speaking to me. And he never once let me down. I mean, there would be times where I had £1 in my bank account, and I'm thinking, so how are we paying for this? Because when Sam started to be unwell, we couldn't get health insurance for him because, ironically, when you're ill, you can't get insured. So we didn't have anything to fall back on. There was not a penny to fall back on. And it was just a case of, how are we going to do this? How, Lord? I'm giving you everything I've got because I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Thanks so much. I mean, you've talked about how you were helped in a practical way with finances. It's sort of amazingly, the time has zoomed by. But tell us a little bit more about how your faith, you shared some of that, how your faith has really made a difference. We've called this hope in the face of death, and hope in Jesus in the face of death. Tell us some more about how that really changes things. You've shared some of it already.
Yeah, I think for me, there is a choice. There's definitely, I think people think you'll either flee from God or draw closer to him. And because I had already had a foundation of faith, I definitely knew that, like I said, I didn't have anything else. I didn't have anyone else. And I remember in the Bible it said, try me now in this. And I was like, Lord, I'm going to try you now because I've got nothing. Please hear me. And I promise you now, there is not one prayer. I kept a prayer journal between 2023 and 2024. And I look back now as I was preparing for this, and I just thought, actually, you've answered a lot of them. And ones you haven't answered, you've done it in such a way. For example, church family, I had a small group at the time and throughout who have just shown up. I didn't have my family close to me, so I didn't know who could pick up Phoebe, who could look after her. And I had people offering help for no money, for nothing other than a cooked meal, if that, without fail. I've been able to keep coming back to my kind of small group meetings every Tuesday because there have been people who will look after her. And the Lord just kept giving me and giving me and giving me. Where the door was closed in my life because I was widowed, he opened window after window after window after window. And he didn't tire. He didn't tire from me crying out to him at 2 a.m., 2 p.m., 2 minutes, 2 hours. He just never stopped listening.
It's a wonderful thing, isn't it? You know, there are those times, loads of good friends around, but there are times late in the night, in the wee small hours, there's no one to turn to, but he's always there.
Yeah.
Rachel, it's been amazing that you've shared with us. We're going to have a question and answer later on in the evening, and people are sure to have some questions. One last one, if I may. There'll be a number of people here who have come to explore things. So good you've come. Looking into things, not sure about things. What would you say to somebody who's just sort of dipping their toe into what Christianity is all about? If you could say one thing to them, as it were, this evening, what would you say to them?
So I asked my daughter, what would you say if somebody said, well, where is Daddy? Or, why are you so sure that Daddy's not in the ground? Because I never say when we go to the cemetery, we're going to see Daddy. I've always said to her that the bones are there because Daddy doesn't need his body anymore because he's not on earth. But Daddy is up in heaven. And she said, he's where he needs to be. And after it broke my heart that she said that, I think that's what we do need Jesus. And we don't need the Jesus of the world. We need the Jesus that's in the Bible. And we need to not be afraid to cry out to him, to not be afraid that he wants something from us. I had nothing. And I just knew that to draw near to him was where I needed to be. And I would just try it. If it doesn't work, back away. But try it. And try the Jesus of the Bible. Don't try the Jesus that is presented in any other way, because he wants a relationship. And though people worry that, if I come to Jesus, my life is going to be this and my life is not going to be that, but it's all for the better. It's all for the better. And even the broken pieces of my life, and I'm still navigating them, I'm no superhero Christian, but the broken pieces of my life, he continues to take them piece by piece and build something. Not quite the picture I thought, but he's still building something. And I will never doubt the fact that he is close to the brokenhearted and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. And often I am that most days. Many people might see me thinking I'm all put together and I managed to hold down a full-time job and my child still looks very well put together. But that's me on the outside. But Jesus knows us on the inside. So you can't hide from him and you can't fake it from him. And that's exactly what he wants. He just wants us as we are. He doesn't want us perfect. He doesn't want us without any faults or failings, just as you are, just as you are.
Now, while Rachel's story is unique to her, sadly, the experience of losing somebody young is not as rare as we might think. Anybody who's in healthcare will know that all too well. My wife is a pediatric nurse. She works in a children's hospice. Sadly, over the years, she has experienced the death of many children. As a vicar in the past 30 years, I've taken literally hundreds of funerals. Many of those that I buried have been under 40. Dying before our time, as we say, is far too common. But, even if you live to a ripe old age, death is horrible. My dad was 82 when he died of heart failure. My mum was 80 and had battled with cancer for 4 years. You could say that both of them had a good innings. They both reached about the national average for a person living in Great Britain. But, I don't need you don't need to hear from me. You'll know this all too well, that didn't stop me feeling the agony of never being able to see them again. Of not being able to just pick up the phone and ask how they were and me tell them how I am. And that deep feeling of sadness of realizing they would never see my children grow up and simply missing them not being around. And especially, those family times like Christmas. The death of a loved one is terrible, and for many, the thought of our own death is terrifying. Woody Allen, the American filmmaker and actor, has joked, "I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens." He also famously quipped, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work, I want to achieve it by not dying." He went on, "I don't want to live in the hearts of my countrymen, I want to carry on living in my apartment." Woody Allen has often made light of death, but it's because he's absolutely terrified of it. He's admitted that in a 2008 interview in Newsweek. He said that he lies awake at night terrified of the void. So troubled by death, he suggested that perhaps never to have been born could be the biggest blessing one could ever have in life. It makes me wonder when I hear Woody Allen say these things, if he ever read the 20th century Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, because he felt similarly towards death. He wrote, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." You hear what Thomas is saying? Don't just accept the inevitability of death. Even in old age, when you've had a good innings, rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the light. Death should be resisted with every fibre of our being, says Thomas. And we know why, because as we've heard tonight, death is terrible. But then, if you've ever experienced bereavement, you don't need me or Dylan Thomas or Woody Allen or Rachael to tell you that. You know just how painful it is. That overwhelming, unbearable distress of grief, as if you've had your rib cage ripped open and then your heart pulled out. It is so painful. Death ruins everything. It ruined everything for Rachael and Phoebe when Sam died. Death ends hopes and dreams. And even before it gate crashes its way into our lives, bringing the party of life to a cruel and abrupt end, even before that, the very inevitability of death casts a shadow over the rest of our lives. It looms there like a bogeyman in a dark alley, and we never know when it's going to jump out. And that is why the gospel of Jesus Christ is the most glorious message that anyone can ever hear. Because there is a great hope in Jesus Christ, who has the answer to the great problem of death. Knowing that death doesn't have the last word changes everything, both now and for eternity. So in the last few moments that I have, before we have a break and then have some questions and answer, let me ask you to turn in this booklet that's on your table to page 32. As you pass them around, I think you'll find there's a bookmark in the page that we want to open it to. And as you're finding that page 32, what you're holding in your hand is John's Gospel. It's one part of the Bible. There are 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is one of them, John's Gospel. And here in chapter 11, we see Jesus coming face to face with death. And when he does, he's with Dylan Thomas. He rages against death, but gloriously he doesn't stop there, just not indignantly snorting at death. Because here we see that Jesus has the answer to death. More than that, he doesn't just have the answer, he is the answer, the resurrection and the life. But I'm kind of jumping ahead. Let me first tell you the story. Look with me at the beginning of the chapter 11. In verse 1, John takes us to a village called Bethany. Do you see it there in verse 1? A village situated on the east side of the Mount of Olives, less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. And John takes us there in order to introduce us to 3 people, Lazarus and his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. Now, the 3 of them, Lazarus, Mary, Martha, were long-standing friends, very dear friends of Jesus. And because you'll see end of verse 2, Lazarus was ill, his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent a message to Jesus saying, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." Now, please note that this is not Mary and Martha asking Jesus to pop by with some grapes and a get well soon card for Lazarus. Lazarus was seriously ill. This is not your typical bloke, with man flu, laying on the sofa, moaning and groaning that he feels like death warmed up when all he has is a heavy cold. You know what us men are like. Well, no, Lazarus was gravely ill. And Mary and Martha were really worried that their brother wouldn't pull through, but they believed that Jesus was able to heal him, and because he'd healed other people on their deathbed. Back in chapter 4, we won't turn to it now, Jesus healed the son of a royal official when he was close to death. And so Mary and Martha got in touch with Jesus saying, will you come? Because our brother is really sick. We want you to come and heal him. And you'll see then in verse 4, top of page 33, when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not end in death. And when we hear those words, there's kind of this sigh of relief if you've got into the story. You see, this is like the surgeon walking out of surgery, out of theatre, still in his scrubs, making his way to anxious relatives who are in the waiting room with the good news, the surgery's gone well, he's going to be fine. Phew, Lazarus isn't going to die. That's what it sounds like. But then we read on. In verse 6, we read that Jesus stayed where he was for 2 days. Again, he's not arrived where Lazarus and his sisters were, so he's stayed away. And then you'll see in verse 14, Jesus breaks the devastating news to his disciples. Lazarus has died. And at this point, we could well be thinking so much for Jesus saying that this illness doesn't end in death. Anyway, a few days later, Jesus made his way to the town of Bethany, where Mary and Martha and now Lazarus had been living, but now dead. And when he arrived, if you look at verse 17, bottom of page 33, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. See what's going on? When Jesus arrived, Lazarus is dead and buried. The family home is like Piccadilly Circus, with the sisters, Mary and Martha, receiving constant streams of visitors popping in to pay their last respects. And when Jesus turns up, Martha here in verse 21, and we see the same words in verse 32 from Mary. But look at what Martha says in verse 21. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. If only you'd been here. It's the sort of thing that I've found as I've met with bereaved people that is said again and again, often on people's lips, if only you'd been here, if only the doctor had made an earlier diagnosis, if only that wonder drug was available, if only they hadn't taken that car journey, if only I'd said that I loved him more often. The regrets expressed in the if onlys, their agony, that sense that things could have been different. That's what Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, felt acutely. They both said it to Jesus, if only you'd been here. Well, that's the story, and then comes the statement. First, there's a remarkable statement from Martha, because despite all the if-onlys, she says in verse 22, we're now on page 34, she says in verse 32, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Martha has remarkable faith in Jesus. Martha believed that Jesus, as it were, had the ear of God. In an extraordinary way, God answers your prayers. It's quite a statement. But the really staggering statement of this chapter comes in the verses that follow. See, Jesus said to Martha, verse 23, we're on page 34, verse 23, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Over the years, I've met some people who are remarkably confident in their own ability. I've met quite a few since working here in the city, people who give the impression that they can do anything. But for all the very self-confident people that we may have come across, if I was a betting man, I would put very big money on you or I never having met someone who has made a claim of this magnitude. Standing before a bereaved woman, Jesus claims to be able to raise people from the grave and give them eternal life. It is a staggering statement. Who does Jesus think he is? Well, he's claiming to be none other than God himself. He is claiming to be the great I am, the one who gives life and sustains life and resurrects life. I was put onto this book some years ago. It's called 13 Things That Don't Make Sense. It's written by the physicist Michael Brooks. He writes about 13 modern-day scientific anomalies. Brooks has a PhD in quantum physics. He's not a Christian, but he's obviously got a huge brain, and he writes brilliantly so that even a dummy like me, who I have to tell you scraped my biology O-level, failed my chemistry O-level, and dropped physics when I was 14. Even a dummy like me can understand this. It's brilliantly written. And in chapter 5 of this book, Brooks explains how scientists know all the essential chemical components necessary to make life. And he describes scientific attempts to put those elements together under the right conditions in order to create life. But the greatest scientific minds on the planet cannot do it. We know precisely all that we need to make life, but with all our scientific knowledge, all the advances we've made, we can't do it because that's the preserve of God, to give life. We can't create life, we can't restore life, and we certainly can't bring dead things back to life. How we wish we could. I'll never forget those first moments after getting a call to say my mum had died. Sunday morning, my brother and I had sat with my mum every day that week. We saw how ill she was after 4 years of battling bowel cancer, which had now gone to her bones and who knows elsewhere. And in that week, knowing she was a Christian, having great confidence of life beyond the grave for her, my brother and I prayed that the Lord would take her. But when God answered that prayer and I got a call on that Sunday morning telling me she was gone, I felt this utter devastation that I would never be able to talk to her again. What I'd have done to be able to bring her back to life just for one more conversation. But we can't bring people back to life. That is the preserve of God. But here is Jesus saying, I can do that. I am the power that gives life to everything. I am the resurrection and the life. I give life beyond the grave to anyone who puts their trust in me. I can give life that goes on forever, never to taste death again. That's Jesus' claim. Now, of course, anybody can make the claim. Although, frankly, if they did, we'd think they were off their rocker. We'd want to get them psychiatric help. But anyone can make the claim. Who can deliver? And as we close, well, as we read on, we discover the great surprise is that Jesus can. See, after a discussion between Jesus and the other sister, Mary, the three of them, Jesus, Mary, and Martha, along with a number of other mourners who crammed into the home there, went down to where Lazarus had been buried 4 days earlier. And if you come to the top of page 35 with me and look down to verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took the stone away, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you. Father, I thank you that you heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And the man who died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." It is astonishing. Jesus raised a dead man from the grave. And with this, I will stop. Let me point out just a couple of things. First, other people were present to witness the raising of Lazarus. We see that in verse 31. And if you want to take this away afterwards, and we'd encourage you to do that, you'll see in the chapters that follow, many other people met Lazarus, the man who had been dead, now back to life. Second, notice we read it a couple of times, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. And this all happened in Israel, very, very hot in the Middle East. And Martha was worried that having been dead 4 days, the stench of rotting flesh would be awful as they opened the tomb. Lazarus was well and truly dead. And third, note that when Lazarus came out of the tomb, his hands and feet were bound with burial cloths. His body had been properly prepared for burial, a process that took hours of people lovingly wrapping his body. Well, look, there was no question that he was dead. They'd have known if he wasn't. And now here he is, 4 days later, shuffling out of the grave at the command of Jesus in front of other people. And so here is Jesus not only saying, "I am the resurrection and the life," but delivering on it. And at the end of John's Gospel, you can read that Jesus himself, after being crucified, dead, and buried, he rose from the dead, never to die again. Death could not keep its stranglehold on him. That is the hope that Christians have in the face of death. Jesus said, "I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me though he die, shall live. And then he proved it. Now, look, I've met a number of people who believe in the afterlife, some from a recognized world religion, others not religious at all, but they like to think that there's something more, but maybe you're one of them. But my question tonight would be, how do you know? What is your belief based on? Just a hunch? Something that you'd like to be true? Christians have the certainty of life beyond the grave based on the factual eyewitness testimony of people who saw Jesus raise Lazarus from dead and then himself defeat death. That's the hope we have. And we'd love you too to have hope in the face of death.
Rachael, do you think you will see Sam again?
Yes, I do, is the quick, short answer. I believe it because Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise, is what he said to the two men on either side of him. And I have told Phoebe straight away that that's exactly what that means. And heaven in the Bible is not described as some airy, fairy, mystical place. It's described in real terms as a real place. And so, yes, I do tell that to Phoebe, and yes, I do believe it.
Same question really, but maybe to you, Paul, but how can we be certain that heaven exists?
Yeah, I'm with Rachael really on that point, because Jesus said it would be. So I think we've really got to look into who we think Jesus is. Is he trustworthy? Can we believe what he said? That's a really fundamental question. Or are we just sort of wanting this to be true some way? So I think if you start looking into the evidence for the reliability of the Bible, then the evidence that Jesus is not just a man, he is God himself. If you get to the point where you think that Jesus really is God, well, then you can believe what he says. So I made quite a few leaps there, but that's how we're so confident. It's not because we think it's real. It's because Jesus says there's a real place. He says in John chapter 14 that he's going to prepare a place for us, that we may go where he is, to his Father's house. He talks about it like going to a mansion.
Rachel, another just very practical question. How do you cope when people tell you you're doing really well, when, as you've said, really you're putting on a brave face?
First of all, I think they do mean well, so I will take it and appreciate their comment. But ultimately, I do know that it is God that is behind me, literally putting the clothes on my back and sorting my child out into school. So I know full well that I'm not doing it by myself. And I know that God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And literally, I see that in practice. So if people say to me, oh, you're doing great, it's because God said he'll never leave me nor forsake me, and therefore he's the one who's made people see the outward of what God is doing behind the scenes. So,
Paul, what you've said depends on the stories in the Bible being real. How do we know that they're not made up like fake news today?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great question leading on from what I just said. Again, let me go from the end of John's Gospel, but I'll give you another thing as well. But at the end of John's Gospel, John writes, this is in John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31, he says, these things, he said, Jesus did many other miracles that are not recorded in this book. So John has 7 sort of big miracles that Jesus did. There are many others that Jesus did that are not recorded, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, what is he saying there? John's saying, I don't expect you to believe on nothing. I expect you to believe on something that actually happened. And I've written these things down so that you can believe. And so we're now no longer just sort of trusting in, oh, I'd like this to be true. If we would go to Luke's Gospel, so there's 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke starts off his Gospel by saying that he's writing to this guy called Theophilus, a Greek guy, and he says, I've gone to great lengths, I've gone to eyewitnesses, I've checked this all out, I've given you an orderly account. That's the beginning of chapter 1. So I've gone to great lengths to make sure that you know what's going on. And then interestingly, I love the beginning of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, where he roots all the events of Jesus' life in history. When I read, when my kids were young, I used to read nursery stories to them. The nursery stories begin once upon a time in a land far away. Luke says, at the particular time when this king or this ruler was in this particular place. So it's not once upon a time in a land far away. It's a particular time, at this time. And there's loads of historical evidence to back up these things.
Rachel, you spoke of God speaking to you in this difficult time. What does that mean? How did you know it was God speaking to you?
I would say that when we pray, we do a lot of talking, and you then get up and expect an answer. But if you're having a conversation with someone, you kind of wait for a response, in a sense. You wait to receive something back if you're doing the talking. And so when I say God speaking, yes, it might not be a literal voice coming to speak to me, but through people, through instances that I know I haven't told anybody. Like I said, it happened mostly during COVID, so I wasn't talking to anybody, and Phoebe was way too young to be doing anything that I was praying for. So when people would come and offer their help, offer their services, that's what I mean in terms of God speaking, because he's heard me and he's provided an answer. And that has been a practical answer. That could have been a financial answer. That could have been an emotional answer. That's him answering me.
And Rachel, you really helpfully said to me when we were chatting that, the amount of times that you have your daily Bible reading and you'd read something in the Bible that was just perfect for that moment. We're very confident that we call this God's word, the Bible God's word. So it's the way God speaks to us. We speak to him in prayer. He speaks to us through the Bible, and you experienced that many times as well, I believe.
Yes. And I kept a prayer journal as well. I mean, sometimes, at first I was very much write it down. But actually, when you then look back, there is no way that things that I was writing a year ago, a week ago, were then not answered, because I look back and I realize right now I'm then reaping the fruit of the seed that I sowed in prayer, and God has answered.
Thank you, Rachel. Paul, I'm going to combine a number of questions which are essentially the same thing. Why doesn't God raise people from the dead today, or save people from death today? Or most pointedly, why didn't God save Sam from death?
Well, they're great questions. We don't have all the answers. Why didn't he save Sam? I have no answer to that. I don't suppose you do as well. Yep. Why doesn't he heal people today? I think he does. I think he does it in a number of ways, sometimes in the most extraordinary supernatural way, sometimes through medicine and through people being treated well. We had somebody sit here at this same event this time last year called Jo. Jo had cancer and she wasn't expecting to live for long. She has got the all clear. I mean, it is incredible. Now she's had lots of chemotherapy, and do I think God was behind that? Yeah, I do. Why doesn't he heal everybody? Don't know. I just don't know. I don't think there's any answer to that. If I was to guess, it would be stupid, because I'm not God. But I think he does still heal. Why does he not raise everybody from the dead? Well, there's going to come a day when everybody will be raised. And it's interesting in the story that we read in John 11. Remember, Jesus said, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I know that he will rise on the final day. So she was Jewish. She knew the Jewish scriptures. The Jewish scriptures teach very clearly that everybody is going to be raised one day. The question is whether we're raised to life or to judgment. And that's what Jesus has come to say. There is going to be a resurrection, but he's come to raise us to eternal life if we put our trust in him.
I think it's so vital, isn't it, to remember what we do know for sure. I remember, Rachel, I was standing at the graveside with Phoebe as we watched Sam's body being lowered. It was just achingly sad. But because you'd asked for it, we just thought about Psalm 103, the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting. And if you know Jesus, then you know that that is for sure the steadfast love of God. I think on that time, I mean, I had so many questions, let alone you and Phoebe, but we thought about what we know for sure, for good reason. And that's what sustains us.
Yeah.
I remember that. Rachel, a question for you. You talked about the struggle with your identity, and any reflections? You didn't tell us where you've got to now. How do you view your identity now?
I still have little blips, but I've realized actually that whilst everything else is a moving plate, I think is the best way, that actually nothing changed with my identity in Christ. Nothing ever changed, whether I was married, not married, whether Sam is here or whether he's not here. Actually, I'm still God's child. I'm still his creation. That is still exactly the same. And I think I kind of view it as maybe when you get an overcast weather day, the sun is still there, but the clouds come in front of it. And that's almost like circumstances and things and trauma and all these things that happen. My identity is always in the sun. The sun is still there, but sometimes you can't see it because there are things in front of it. And then I think now as God is continuing to just show himself and reveal himself and help me and grow me, and I'm not on just survival mode anymore, I'm like to think that I'm thriving a bit more, that those chinks of light are coming through the clouds. And so I can realize that actually nothing changed with me and God. Everything else changed, don't get me wrong, but actually nothing changed. And so instead of me just thinking that the circumstances rule me, actually it's remembering that God is the Lord of my circumstances. And so therefore my identity in him is exactly the same. And that never changed. But I had forgotten that or lost it because of everything else that was in front.
Thank you. Paul, death brings to the fore the question, what is the meaning of life anyway? What would you say?
I could be really naughty and say, come back on Thursday, because we're going to be thinking about that very thing. What is the meaning of life? There's a remarkable verse that the Apostle Paul wrote. So Paul was a follower of Jesus. He wrote most of the New Testament, most of the bit of the Bible that's written after Jesus. And he wrote, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain." And I've often thought to myself, if you look at that verse and you say, "For me to live is," so what do you live for? For me to live is, what is it? It might be, your husband or wife, your spouse. It might be your career. It might be, your football club. I know it sounds pathetic, but some people live for that. It might be all sorts of things. I mean, I live for Leeds, but a little bit. Anyway, but for me to live is, when death comes, what? For me to live is my career. Well, what happens when you're made redundant? I mean, this all ties into identity again. Suddenly, people find this. What have I got? For me to live is my spouse. What happens when they die? You've lost everything. I mean, it's a good thing to put your life into your wife, into your husband, into your loved one. It's a good thing to throw your life into your career. They're not bad things in and of themselves. But if that's your everything, when that thing goes, you've lost everything. But if you say, for me to live is Christ, then not only do you have everything now, but you have everything when death comes, you actually go to be with him. You actually get the very thing that you were made for. So I think in that one verse we find what to live is, and therefore what were we made for? What is life all about? To be in glorious relationship with Jesus.
I'm staggered. Jesus himself, isn't it, in John's Gospel, chapter 17, he puts it the same truth the other way around. He says, eternal life is to know him. I mean, if that's possibly the most staggeringly arrogant thing someone could ever say, that what you and everyone was made for, where you'll find your fulfillment is in me. So, but in one sense, I love it that he's so clear. He says, you need to work that out. Can I satisfy your deepest need? Can I really give you what you long for forever? It kind of ups the ante as you read John's Gospel. I mean, read it and say, well, go on, Jesus, show me. Are you really the one I was made for? But if it's true, it's wonderful. Rachel, maybe this will be the last question for you. Someone has said, this happened 5 years or so ago, you've wrestled with it since then. How would you know if someone came to you in a very similar situation and they'd suddenly lost someone close to them? How might you seek to help, comfort, encourage them?
I am always amazed that the Bible puts it very true. I think it's very easy for a Christian to maybe say, and I've had it, it is well, or the Lord is your strength, and just kind of downplay it. But the Bible does say we grieve, but we don't grieve without hope. Now, absolutely acknowledge that grief. Death is awful, and I'm not going to lie and sit here and say, well, I'm 5 years on, so it's all good. There are days and moments that are awful still and continue to be awful still. And so I will be very honest and open with them and let them grieve, but hopefully let them know that there is hope and that it is possible for God to take the broken pieces and almost like a mosaic, it's broken pieces that then become this beautiful new picture. And so there are the pieces that are broken and it will hurt and it is hard. But I can definitely say, like I said, I'm no superhuman, there's nothing special here, but the Lord will take those pieces and he will build something back. He will build it, absolutely.
Rachel, thank you so much. I think that's a very appropriate place to end. And Paul, you promised 9:05. So I'll just wrap up in a minute, but maybe for the last time, shall we thank Paul, but especially Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel, yeah.